We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by Senator John Thune. And Senator Thune, we appreciate you joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Spencer. And Merry Christmas to you and Phil.
Well, we appreciate that. I want to start off this week talking about kind of the December wrap-up that we're seeing on Capitol Hill. That, of course, includes the efforts on the part of Senate Democrats to pass the Build Back Better legislation. We saw on Thursday President Biden coming out basically acknowledging that it's not going to happen this year. But the fact that it's not going to happen this year does not make it any less of a priority for many folks on the other side of the aisle from you. So wondering if you could kind of crystal ball for us, where does this legislation go from here? If not this big Christmas deadline that could have pushed action, is the bill delayed or is it dead in your opinion?
Well, I think it's delayed for now, but that's a good thing because I think the more people find out about it, the more likely it is that we will be able to kill it dead. But at least right now, they're holding back on doing it. And honestly, they needed to. I mean, they didn't have the time to. It takes a certain amount of days to transact a bill like that across the Senate floor. They still didn't have scores on it from the Congressional Budget Office. They hadn't done some of the what they call the bird bath, which is a vetting process that the parliamentarian takes provisions in the bill through to determine whether or not they're eligible to be included. And they, like for example, they had immigration in there, got knocked out yesterday. That's not a place where you should be. Reconciliation isn't a place where you ought to be doing immigration policy. So there are a number of things that just weren't ready for prime time. And secondly, they didn't have the votes. I mean, you still have Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who are looking at this bill, looking at the Congressional Budget Office report that came out last week that said it doesn't really cost 1.7 trillion, it really costs 5 trillion. And then the taxes associated with it, which I know that Sinema is trying to get some changes to. There's just a lot of concern about this. Manchin has expressed concern about inflation, and the inflationary numbers that we saw come out last week were historic. I mean, highest in 40 years. And I tell people when the last time inflation was this high, ET was in the theaters, and I remember it well. But I don't think the country wants to go back to the kind of inflation that we had in the late 70s and early 80s, and certainly agriculture doesn't. And we're seeing huge run-ups in input costs for ag these days. This inflation issue is really going to hit agriculture hard, and even at a time when we've seen good markets, export markets, we're seeing prices have firmed up, although they weren't where they were recently, but they're at least farmers have felt good about being able to move their product. Now we're looking at a lot of pessimism about this next year, and most of it has to do with the high cost of natural gas and fertilizer and fuel, diesel, machinery. Everything is seeing huge run-ups in costs, and that's going to make profitability and margins really challenging this year in agriculture.
Senator, thanks again for being with us. Even as they try to figure out how to get this bill passed, the committees, including Senate Ag Committee, which you sit on, the Democrats on the committee have added $2 billion in conservation technical assistance to this. It obviously has over $20 billion in conservation program spending, $5 billion in addition for cover crops. You've been one of the biggest advocates of conservation funding on the Hill. Do you think this is a bad idea? Would you want to see this money redirected, if it does pass, redirected into other, like the commodity title or other areas of the Farm Bill?
I would just like to have some input into it, Phil. We haven't had any visibility into what they're doing. They set a number and they kind of broke it down into buckets. And so you're right, they got a good amount in there for conservation, a good amount for forestry, a good amount for nutrition, but very little in the commodity title of the bill. And so it would be nice just to have a little input as we typically do on these issues, because as you know from working past farm bills, those tend to be very bipartisan efforts, and Republicans and Democrats are both at the table. But in this case, at least, they have made all these decisions absent any input from Republicans. So it's going to be a very one-sided thing. And I honestly don't know exactly how they're going to divide up the conservation money. As you pointed out, there are some general categories that they're going to evidently plow it into. But yes, there's some ways to spend it well, not spend it well. And obviously, this spends a whole lot more in certain areas than, particularly with the farm bill coming up, we think they should. I mean, a lot of these issues are issues that would be farm bill issues, at which point you would have that bipartisan input and hopefully find a consensus about what the best way is to see that these dollars go to their highest and best use.
Speaking of the Farm Bill, Federal Reserve came out this week, indicated that they may be taking some steps to try to rein in inflation, possibly looking at interest rate increases next week. You and some of your colleagues sent a letter to the Fed and the banking system regulators, including the Farm Credit Administration, and said, we'd like you to monitor the impact of inflation on ag costs and that it would inform possibly your work on the safety net for farmers, the Farm Bill. Do you see inflation potentially justifying some increase in reference prices in the commodity program? And how would you pay for it?
Right. That the big question, of course, is the second question you asked, and that is how you pay for it. But I do think that inflation is definitely going to impact farmers' bottom lines, and the dollars just aren't going to go as far. So whatever safety net programs we have in the commodity title of the Farm Bill, you're going to be limited by just again the loss of I guess you could say spending power that you would have relative to where we were a year ago, just because of this big increase in inflation. And in the 6.8% inflation that we saw for the entire economy, which obviously hits families and workers and budgets really hard, agriculture is seeing even bigger increases. I mean, you look at what we're talking about for basic things that you need in an agricultural operation right now. You're seeing 30 to 50% increases in some of these energy prices, for example, and diesel fuel. But it's hitting everything. And the letter to the basically to the federal government that has jurisdiction over some of these lending agencies is, work with these producers. Let's figure out ways to get them through it. And, obviously, if the Fed does decide to move forward with rate increases next year, which is what, as you mentioned, they're talking about, that has a profound impact on agriculture because, most of the land and the operation, all that stuff is financed with debt and even operating loans from year to year. And the cost to borrow money is going to go up significantly. So I think that will affect how we view the Farm Bill, and certainly particularly in the commodity title where the safety net programs are. It may necessitate and require some adjustments in reference prices.
Senator, I want to wrap up today talking about a bill that a couple of your Senate Ag GOP colleagues have been pushing to bring some reforms to the cattle markets. Senators Fisher and Grassley, as well as Senators Tester and Wyden, pushing the cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act, looking to create these regional mandatory minimum trade requirements, produce a contract library, really introduce a number of reforms to the cattle sector. This is kind of one of a number of pieces of legislation that have been produced in relation to cattle politics and some of the black swan events that we've seen on the last couple of years. And now we currently have the House suggesting a 1-year extension of LMR through September. The Senate has not acted on that quite yet, currently authorized through mid-February through the CR. So I guess I wonder, kind of a two-part question is, first off, wondering where you stand on the bill that your colleagues have introduced, and just kind of where you see the cattle politics discussion going as we turn the page here into 2022.
Well, I first off, Spencer, just talking with respect to the margins that the packers are running up are just unsustainable. You cannot explain to somebody who's out producing beef in this country why packers are seeing 300% increases in their margins. That it's just I understand the pandemic and supply chain and supply demand. There are a number of things that factor into that. But that is it's just the disparity between what packers are realizing and what producers are realizing right now is something that's got to be dealt with. And there are a number of proposals, as you mentioned, to deal with that. I am looking at all of them and evaluating what we think makes the most sense. And it would be very helpful if we could get the livestock groups in particular behind at least one approach. Grassley Fisher, at least in our state, you've got one livestock group opposed to it because it doesn't go far enough. One that's supporting it, albeit by a very narrow margin, and another one supporting it or opposing it because they think it goes too far. So, I mean, there's a sweet spot in here I think we can find, but we've got to address the issue. And the fact that there just isn't transparency, I think the price reporting and transparency, disclosure, all those things are important and need to be solved. And if you're going to have a free market that works, you got to have competition. And that's what we're lacking in this market right now is competition. You've got 4 packers that control over 80% of the harvest and have an enormous amount of market power. And then if they can pull from their own inventory, and it gives them an incredible amount of power to set prices. So the issues need to be addressed the wise way, smart way to do it that doesn't take away from producers' ability to manage their risk and to use some of these alternative marketing arrangements that they use and maintain at least some flexibility for them. Ultimately, what we want to do, I think, is put the producer more in the driver's seat and give them more power over not only what they raise, but how they market it in a way that gets them a fair and competitive price. And so we're looking at all those different things. I'm listening to, and we've been doing a lot of outreach and getting feedback from the agricultural groups in South Dakota, and that'll shape and inform a lot of where we end up.
Obviously, a number of things going on, as there always is in the month of December on Capitol Hill, as folks seek to kind of wrap up their yearly agenda. A number of things going on. We could probably sit here and talk to you for another half hour, honestly, with all of the various balls that are up in the air. But we do appreciate the time, and hope you and your family have a Merry Christmas, Senator.
Yep, same to you, and to Phil, Spencer. Hope you guys have a great holiday, and we'll see you back. And you're right, there's a lot going on, a lot of balls in the air, and we're trying to, as best we can, get things wrapped up here and get people, back in their states and for the holiday season. Thank you.
Well, for Senator John Thune and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.